He's angry about mortgages. It's Angry Mortgage. He's swearing. He's cursing loud. He's old. He's opinionated. And he's been doing this so damn long. This program is about mortgages, and this is mortgage advice, but the advice may not apply to your situation. Contact licensed mortgage professionals for specific recommendations before you make decisions about mortgages. You may not agree with Ron, but if you don't, he thinks you're wrong. Oh, and did we say there is a lot of swearing?
And we're back on the Angry Mortgage podcast. This is a very special podcast. The subject we've touched on before on the pod that is one that really interests me because for whatever reason, I can't even tell you the reason, but I'll tell you this much. I fucking hate scams. I just hate scams. I hate organized scams. I hate particularly people who take advantage of the elderly and the infirm and the uneducated, because that exists. I mean, people always ask me, they say, Ron, I mean, you talk about some of these crazy things that happen to people in homeownership, and isn't that their own fault? Well, let me tell you something. It's not always their own fault. Sometimes, if we go back years and years and years and decades, when the price of homes in Ontario wasn't all starting with $1 million in front of it, ordinary people who were not necessarily all high school graduates, could, had solid jobs, produce manager at the Loblaws and the, PSW at the hospital, and they could buy houses. And then gradually those houses got to be worth more and more, and, that's all a good thing. But nobody would, even the people themselves wouldn't describe themselves as highly sophisticated people. And they own houses, and they're in houses, and some of those houses are worth a lot of money. And the elderly and the unwell exist. We all know this. The elderly own a hell of a lot of houses. They just own a ton of them. Julian is, and I got to admit, I'm very, very thankful that he reached out to me because I don't know anybody else in the legal profession who's taking any interest in this at all, frankly. Okay, and you do. But reached out to me about a subject we've covered before on the pod. The absolutely fucking ridiculous sale of water heaters, furnaces, air conditioners, water softeners, air filters. Shit, there's a long list, right, Julian?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
11
different pieces of junk that are scammers. And I'm just going to go right ahead and use the term that people are peddling to homeowners with an extremely deceptive practice of registering on their homes. Now, it's not a mortgage, it's not a lien, but it's a PPSA. And tell us a little bit more about how that PPSA works, Julian.
So the registration is officially called a notice of security interest. Essentially what it says is that there's a piece of property inside the property in question, inside the house, or several pieces of property that don't belong to the homeowner.
Chattel, okay.
Exactly. So it could be a water purifier, it could be a water softener, HVAC system, smart thermostats, HEPA filters. I mean, I've seen water heaters. I've seen just about everything. Any kind of chattel virtually can be the subject of that kind of registration, notice of security interest under the PPSA. What it does is not only does it give notice that there's property in there that doesn't belong to the homeowner, but it also acts as an encumbrance, which means that suppose a house is sold. There is a pecking order in terms of encumbrances. There's a mortgage, say there's a bank mortgage, it's generally going to be a first mortgage. It gets paid out first. There's a notice of security interest after it, it gets paid out next. Well, suppose someone wants to, say, refinance and get a new mortgage registered. Well, if that mortgage is registered after the notice of security interest, that mortgage is going to be in second position.
A mortgage is going to be
or
in third
or in
position.
third,
Yeah.
as if there's a mortgage before it, and that first mortgage isn't discharged. But suppose someone refinances in order to pay off the first mortgage with the new mortgage. Well, the new mortgage is still going to be in second position after the first mortgage is gone. So mortgage lenders, as you know better than anyone, they're not going to want to do that. They're going to want this notice of security interest postponed so that it is second position after the mortgage. That causes a lot of problems for homeowners.
So let's sum up the most critical issue here. The most critical issue is that someone has got a water heater or a HEPA filter or an air purifier or a water softener, some damn thing. And all of them, every single one you've ever met, and by the way, every single one I've ever met, and we've encountered this a lot, as we talked about in another show, they don't have a goddamn clue there's anything registered on their house in a legal sense. Not one. And have you ever run into one that knew?
Not one.
Not one.
Not until they're about to close a deal. Because these scammers, they never give notice that they're registering this. They never give notice after it's registered. And you only find out because someone did a title search on your property, usually your lawyer. Well, that only happens because you're about to sell your house or refinance it, generally speaking. And that might only be a week or two before the actual closing of the transaction, be it the new mortgage or the sale. And so there's a serious time crunch. And that's part of why this scam works. It's part of why they can leverage these notices of security interest against the homeowner because they don't have much time to deal with it.
Okay, let's go back to the absolute genesis of the thing. So, Pete, for whatever reason, so a little bit about your background first, because I think your whole background is probably the reason you took an interest in this. Okay, you're not originally you're not originally from Ontario, and you practiced law in New Brunswick. Is that correct?
Yes, I practiced law in New Brunswick, and that's where I was called to the bar and practiced there for a couple of years, and then came to Ontario.
And this does not exist in New Brunswick. This secured interest of water heaters and air conditioners and furnaces, it doesn't exist.
Not that I ever saw.
And you saw a few, but
yeah, I saw lots. I was the main litigator in the firm where I practiced. And we did a lot of real estate. I'd say the majority of the real estate transactions in that area. I never heard any of this happening in New Brunswick, which doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't happen to any degree, but it wasn't enough to attract my interest, if you will.
But as soon as you got here to Ontario, opened your firm, and started doing some real estate deals, suddenly you found this cropped up immediately.
Immediately. I mean, within literally the first week of practicing here, I encountered 2 files where this was a problem.
So let's and that maybe is why you took an interest, because you're not strictly trained as a real estate lawyer. You're trained as a litigator, so you could smell something was rotten in Denmark. God, that's an expression nobody uses anymore. For all you guys and gals under 35, just forget I said it. Nobody will understand that. But at the end of the day, you realized something was way off here. Like, what the hell's going on went through your mind, because you weren't raised with it like all the real estate lawyers who, if you started to article with a real estate law firm in Ontario, you would have seen it same as you, first week. So you would have had a different thought process about it. But because you're a litigator, and because you are from another province, which you'd never heard of this bullshit before, it immediately struck you as something crazy. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I basically have a radar where I can detect people who need to get sued.
That's a good one. All right.
And that radar had an awful lot of hits on it when I came here.
Now, we'll get back to this issue of why this is not extremely consistently litigated here in Ontario. We'll get back to that in a bit. But first of all, I want to take us through how this crazy shit happens. Okay, let's just start at the very beginning. So it's against the law since 2018 to go door to door or to cold call in any way, even over the phone, to cold call, approach anybody to sell this stuff. You got a list of the stuff. Okay?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll get the list of the stuff that it's illegal to sell door to door or by cold calling. Even though it's been illegal since 2018, it still happens. And people are still dealing with the...
Let's go back to the 2018 thing. So obviously, the government was pissed off enough at what was going on, selling these things door to door, enough complaints, enough tragedy, enough horrible outcomes to make it against the law. That's obvious, right?
That's right.
That's what happened. So we got all these different things. Tell us what's on the list.
So the list of things that you can't sell door to door: cold calls, furnaces, air conditioners, air cleaners, air purifiers, water heaters, water treatment devices, water purifiers, water filters, water softeners, duct cleaning services. And that's a big scam right now. And then 11 is any goods or services that are a combination of or that perform the functions of the goods or services listed in any of paragraphs 1 to 10.
All right, so let's basically say, in essence, that is everything that scammers wanted to sell. That was outlawed. So you can't do that. And yet, you and I both know it's still going on.
They're taking measures to get around it. In some cases, they just blatantly break the law and they don't care because, well, what's going to happen? Okay, the occasional person will sue them and cost them a few tens of thousands of dollars by suing them. Okay, but the majority of people won't sue them. The people that they successfully rip off, the amount of money they gain from that is more than enough to pay the occasional lawsuit. And these scammers see it as the cost of doing, business or the cost of running their scam, if you will.
Sure, I understand. So going back to the very foundations. So this was obviously judged by the government of Ontario to be a completely shitty practice that needed to stop. And they stopped it. They thought they stopped it. They put in measures, put in a law that says you cannot do this.
That's right.
But we know that it's being done right now. So let's just describe what happens. So there's still salespeople running around Ontario, going to individual houses, because it doesn't make any sense to go to an apartment or a condo tower or anything like that. But they're running around going to individual, there's a gang of them, right? A gang goes out of salespeople. To this day, right now, and breaking the law, and they're going out and they're doing what? They're knocking on doors.
Yeah, they're knocking on doors, and depending on the salesperson and what they're trying to sell, the scam will be slightly different, but it does have some common elements. It all involves lies, usually a misrepresentation as to who the people actually are at the door. Yep. Sometimes they explicitly or implicitly say that they're members of the government. They're employees of the government,
or the utility,
or the utility company. Yeah. Oh, we're here to test your water. They'll say things like that.
Or we're here to talk to you about energy-saving rebates from the government.
Yes, yeah. They use that too, and they say you're going to get a whole bunch of rebates for installing this more energy-efficient equipment in your house. So we're going to do you a favor. We're going to save you money, and yada yada. And then you invite them in your home, and they use high-pressure sales tactics and also just blatant fraud. So, for example, they'll say, "Pour me a glass of water." So that we can test your water. And then they'll pull out a little dropper bottle and they'll say, all right, I'm going to drop some of our testing solution into this glass of water. And if it changes to a particular color, then it's a problem. And if it doesn't change color, then it's fine. I'm not sure which substance they use. It's probably the stuff that we used in chemistry lab in high school that, changes color when you put it in water. And it changes color.
Every single time.
And they know it's going to. And they say, oh no, your water's poison. You need our water purification system to protect you. And you know what? We're going to save you money too, because while we're at it, we'll also put in this more efficient water heater or whatever. And so we're going to save you money on your utility bill. And there's a word for it. When you lie to someone, especially when the lie is accompanied by falsifying physical evidence, in order to induce them to give you money, and then you take their money, all the while you know that you're breaking the law, that's fraud.
That's clearly
fraud. And very little is happening about it, and that's a major source of frustration to homeowners and those in the legal community.
So the scammers are the salespeople, and let's face it, they have a victim profile. Their victim profile is typically mainly the elderly. Right? That's fair to say. And sometimes even worse, mainly elderly people alone whose spouses have passed. Okay.
Every single one of my clients who had fallen prey to this was elderly. Yeah. And all but one was living alone, either because they were single or a widower.
So we have encountered some of this in our own practice. And again, almost all elderly. The occasional situation where people are, as I suggested, extremely unsophisticated. And there was always a hook. Like there was, in one particular case, there was a child, a woman who owned the home. Her son was living with her, and her son and his girlfriend had a child, and the child was new to the home. And all of a sudden, they were told that the reason the child's coughing by the gang of sales scammers, the reason the child coughs is because we've tested your air just now, and look at this meter. This air is poison. You need a sophisticated HEPA air filter to be installed here. Mm-hmm. Now, let's jump to where how the scam is aided and abetted by our own billing systems that we have. Mm-hmm. So the thing that happens is people, if they were asked to pay $5,000, $10,000, $2,000, any kind of thousands, if you were asked people to pay, they would immediately reject it. However, that's not what happens, right?
That's right. They sign these contracts, which are on a little piece of paper and have extremely fine print on the back. And in that fine print, it says that by signing this contract, you authorize us to bill, to have our monthly payments added to your utility bill, usually through.
So that almost implies the utility is on board with this, right?
It kind of implies it. I think that the utilities, so far as I can tell, are kind of they're innocent bystanders, if you will, and they don't have much of a choice when they're presented with this contract and the request to add the payments. But they will take the payments off if the homeowner demands it.
So what I'm guessing is that because we know there's been, I can tell you, since I've lived in Ontario for like 38 some odd years, mm-hmm. is that there was always homes with rental water heaters. Always was. So what I'm guessing, I think I'm guessing right, is that what eventually happened, but that was always through the utility. The utility would install the water heater and say, we're going to charge you $12 a month or whatever the hell it was. I'm guessing that eventually the provincial government said, wait a minute, if you're going to do this, you have to allow competitors to do it. And therefore, anybody who installs the water heater and gets the third-party billing authorization, you've got to allow that to go through. Okay, I'm guessing, but I'm 99% sure I'm dead right. So this is where the essence of the scam comes in, folks. You're signing this little piece of paper with super fine print. They are just blitheringly lying to you blatantly lying about what the contents of it is. They will never tell you, ever, because as Julian, as you and I both know, not one living soul that we've ever run into this with knew there was a registration on their house. So they're told it's just a payment. You're going to be paying $39 a month. It's just going to be in your bill for your utilities. And by the way, because it's special today, because you've agreed to do this today, we're going to waive the $1,100 installation fee. Okay, and they do. They do waive. There's no installation cost. Mm-hmm. So this is the perfect scam. You've told people that your water's poisoned, or that your air is dangerous in your house, or that you're drinking sediment because your water heater's too old, or whatever bullshit story is used to convince the elderly, the infirm, or the unsophisticated that they're in big trouble. And the brilliant news is it's only $39 a month. So, mm-hmm. And it's through your utility company. So it must be all right if it's through the utility company.
That's right. And they'll say, sure, you're paying $39 a month or $119 a month, whatever it is. Yeah. Depends on the number of items. But, this stuff is so efficient, it's also going to save you money, they'll often say, especially when it comes to water heaters and HVAC systems. But it's a lie. It doesn't save you money. It costs you a lot of money, because by the time you make all the payments or you pay out this notice of security interest, you pay 10 times or even more the market value of the junk that they put in your house.
Okay, let's get to the money in a second, but I just want everybody to make sure that we've illustrated just how easy this could happen. This is not asking for any sizable payment up front. This is made to seem like an innocuous payment on your utility bill, and with the implied idea that the utility's on board with this. Okay,
that's right.
And then you're in danger, and we're going to fix everything, and that is pretty compelling. You got the provenance, so to speak, of the utility company. and you've got danger. And maybe he's right. Furnace is 15 years old. Maybe they're right. So now we're going to come to the heart of the scam, because the heart of the scam is a financial matter. Very interesting. Like when I really just got more thoroughly involved with this with another client. That's what you must have heard the podcast because you reached out, and it was an amazing story. It's still an amazing story, but now I'm coming to learn from Julian. This is a story that's repeating itself. What, 1,000 times a month in Ontario? 500 times? It's a big number, right?
Huge number. Because I practice real estate law mainly in one small little corner of Ontario. Port Colborne's population 20,000.
Lots of good people there. Not a thriving metropolis. Yes, that's right.
That's right. And it happens to them all the time. And if I encounter it all the time in a little hamlet by Ontario standards, how many times is this happening in big cities? I know for a fact it's happened in Ottawa many, many, many times, for example.
There we go. Yeah.
Based on the number of charges against companies that do it. So it seems to be happening all the time from what I've seen.
So it's thousands and thousands. And how much money are we talking? Let me give you a little example, and then Julian will confirm some of these numbers. So in the particular case that we ran into, it was a furnace, an air conditioner, and a HEPA filter that was so badly installed, the HEPA filter, that they just disconnected it because it just didn't work at all. All right. So these three items, which probably had if you went down to Home Depot and bought them, would probably run you about 12 grand. Okay. Give or take. Maybe less, maybe a touch more. But this 12 grand worth of products that was installed, some of it's just junk. I mean, you couldn't use it because it never worked. They actually had spent money they actually spent a little bit of money uninstalling it because they couldn't handle the noise and the problems that it created. And we applied for discharge. We said to them, well, we're going to refinance of a mortgage, and we need to get this paid off. We don't want to continue it. We don't want to postpone it. We're not interested. We want you to send us a payout statement. Now, the person had been paying around, I don't know, maybe about $2,000 a year for about 4 years. It's about $8 grand. Again, retail value of all this stuff, maybe $12,000 to $14,000. They'd paid $8 grand. We received a payout statement for $58,000 for these three items. $58,000 fucking dollars. Okay. Now, you've seen a lot of that stuff. Tell us about it.
All the time. So, for example, I had a client who had a water heater installed in her home by one of these crooked companies, and the payout. Well, I looked at the slip that she signed, and there was a payout formula on the back, which was quite obtuse. It took me several minutes to even figure it out, but I ended up figuring it out and doing the math, and I realized that if she paid all the payments on this or paid it out early, either way, she was going to pay about $23,000
for a water heater.
Yeah.
Sweet Jesus.
It's outrageous. I mean, the profit margins are about 1,000% easy on these, for these scammers based on this junk. And it's never installed right, in my experience, because no reputable company is going to work with these scammers and tank their reputation. Or
be subject to lawsuit.
That too.
Yeah.
That too. And they never give their names or who they are. I mean, I've never, in my practice, found out the names of the actual installers. So they're employed by who knows whom, but they never do a good job of it. So it's a bad product, it's badly installed, and they want to charge you more than 10 times market value of a good product. So you can imagine how much money these people are raking in.
So in your practice, it's the same situation that I encountered through this refinance issue. We're refinancing a mortgage. That in most cases, I think yours are sales. Yours are sales of homes, right?
Usually. Occasionally, we'll find a problem like this with a refinance, but 90% of the time, it's client goes to sell their home. We do the title search, find out there's a notice of security interest, and as soon as I find that, I call the client and I say, you got to come in immediately, or as soon as you can. We got to have a meeting about this because I need to tell you about this problem.
Because you know it's trouble.
I know it's trouble.
As soon as you see
in my whole practice, I've only ever encountered 2 notices of security interest that were not registered fraudulently.
Wow. So the person has sold their home, and you go through your normal process, and you discover these secured interests on title. You know there's going to be trouble. You call your client in, you tell them there's going to be trouble, but sometimes it's not even that easy for you to get the payout statement in a timely fashion, right? Like you write for the payout statement, you go to the people who you can find. Like, tell us about these million companies you find who had all these things. I mean, because there's always a company, but it might have been, the whole thing may have been assigned or actually sold. The contract's been resold several times. So you've run into a situation where there's a company that, how many different companies has they got?
Oh, so many. So to give you an idea, so usually with these scams, there's an installing company.
Right.
And then there's a company
which is also
that
the sales
finances it.
group, right? The sales installers, they work hand in hand. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. And after they get the junk in the house, they sell the contract to some financing company.
Right.
Which sometimes is basically controlled by the same people, has the same registered office address. Sometimes it's a different one with a different registered office address and different directors and so on. So they inevitably register a whole bunch of different companies, both for installers and for the financers. So one of the biggest culprits of this on the financing side is a group of companies that all have variants of Crown Crest in their name.
Crown Crest. Okay.
Yeah. So I'll give you an idea. Crown Crest Capital Corp, Crown Crest Capital Management Corp, Crown Crest Corp, Crown Crest Corp 2, Crown Crest Corp 3, Crown Crest Corp 4, Crown Crest Financial Corp.
There's multiple pages of this thing, right?
There's like 4 pages of it. It just keeps on going on like that. And they're all still active, and it costs money every year to keep these registered. You have to file their tax returns. You have to file their annual returns. You have to keep the minute books up to date.
All cost money.
All cost money.
So they're doing it for
a reason.
There's a reason somebody would have all these jillion companies, right? So there's something going on there. Now, before we get to the incredible story of the human behind this thing, all right, we're gonna go back to the process. So the idea here is that there's that gang of sales and installation people, and they want to make money. So you were mentioning to me that you interviewed someone who worked for one of the sales gangs, and what was she getting paid per sale?
About $900.
So it's on pure commission, but if you can do a couple of those in a week,
that's good money for someone who only has a high school education.
And maybe it's tax-free because maybe they're just handing them over the checks, right?
I doubt they're declaring their income on
they're
this.
not declaring their income, yeah. Okay.
And it's not like they're looking for mortgages anytime soon. These are usually people in their early 20s, trying to get some money for school and whatnot. And so that's the thing. A monetary incentive can make otherwise decent people do indecent things.
That's been known to happen. So there's the selling gang and the installation gang. And we've got to remember, this is the important thing to remember, listeners, is that there's somebody who has to buy these pieces of junk. Now they have a cost, and you got to pay somebody to install them. So let's guess that if you bought, again, the 3 different pieces of junk, maybe it's the air conditioner, the furnace, and the HEPA cleaner, and that's like $12,000. Okay, you maybe get a little bit better because you're a contractor. You maybe get them for 10, whatever, and they're pretty shitty. So maybe they're only 9. I don't know, but there has to be some money paid somewhere, and somebody has to be paid to do the crap job of installing it. So that's probably about $12,000 plus that's gone. But the reality is there's no installation charge. So somebody has to give this gang of installers and salespeople $12,000, or maybe a little more, because that guy wants to make a profit too. So maybe that's about a $16,000 thing, okay, that they got paid. But somebody gave that group of hustlers, that group of kind of scammers, $16,000, and that's the people with the money. That's the capital organization, okay? Now, they are the real owners of the whole thing. Like the installers just vanished, the salespeople just vanished. Like you litigated one of them, right? There's one you did litigate. So tell us about that. Who did you litigate on the install side?
On the install side, so I've litigated a number of these. On the install side, we're suing Braun Bros Heating and Cooling Solutions Limited.
Okay.
Which was registered in Saskatchewan.
Saskatchewan?
Yeah, of all places, but it seems to do most of its scamming in Ontario. And then it had a financing core called 21st Financial Inc., registered the same place. The registered office address is a law firm. So I figured out very quickly, who had done the registration and who their lawyers were. So I contacted their lawyers when I found this garbage on title, these notices of security.
And they're all the same address. The installers, the capital people, and the lawyers. They're all the same place, right?
All same place.
All right.
So convenient in a way. But so I contacted them and I said, look, this notice of security interest, it violated the Consumer Protection Act. Because what they did was they cold called the client after it was illegal to do so and, talked to her for a while, convinced her to let them put junk in her house.
Once again, elderly client.
Elderly client. Yeah. She was late 60s at the time, and lives alone.
Right.
And she's not educated in the law, nor should she be expected to be. You shouldn't need to have a law degree to avoid a scam.
That's for sure.
There should just not. How about this? How about we not have predators going around trying to convince people to give them an outrageous amount of money for a garbage product? That would be nice.
Yep.
So, and that's what the Consumer Protection Act, in theory, as written, is supposed to protect people against. So
you contacted these people.
So I contacted them, and I said this violated Consumer Protection Act for a number of reasons, but the most obvious reason was that my client was cold called, and that's not legal. And I even showed them the section under a Consumer Protection Act that makes it illegal because he's a Saskatchewan lawyer. I didn't assume that he knew any of that. So I showed that to him, and he said, oh, so he replied to me with an audio file, which was a conversation between my client and this Braun Bros representative. And
post-installation. This was all post-installation.
Post-install, exactly. Yeah. And the gist of the conversation was, it was a closing call. The person said, so, we're just calling you to confirm that everything was installed to your satisfaction and our employees were polite. And so they asked those questions. Were you satisfied with the employees' politeness? Yes. Was everything installed? Yes. Et cetera, et cetera. And she said, yes.
Lots of yeses.
Lots of yeses. And then they asked the critical question, which was, and you contacted us first about these products, right? Yes.
So this is an elderly woman who's just finished answering 7 or 8 or 9 yeses, and they asked this seemingly innocuous question, which was untrue, but she still said yes.
Exactly. And it's a bizarre question because shouldn't that representative know who contacted who first? Don't they have records about this? So I replied to the lawyer and said, this doesn't prove anything other than your client's representative was trained to get someone to say yes a whole bunch of times and bore them.
After the fact. Yeah.
After the fact. Yeah. And just say yes, 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 including yes to this critical question. I said, show me the call where my client allegedly called yours and said, yes, I want your products. I saw your advertisement wherever. Please come to my house.
Obviously, they're recording calls at this company. Obviously.
Yes,
okay?
obviously, yep.
So then they sent this audio file. Okay, so fine. Just send me. My client absolutely assures me she was cold called. So, and you're saying, no, she wasn't cold called. She called you. So just send me the recording of that opening call. Send me the recording of when the receptionist picked up the phone and said, hi, Braun Bros, whoever the hell they are, and how can I help you? Send that recording. Then what happened?
And so I asked him to do that, and he said, oh, well, my client doesn't record incoming calls, only outgoing calls. To which I said, that doesn't make any sense because the call that you need to prove that you're not violating the Consumer Protection Act is the incoming call, where a client contacts you first. So that makes no sense, and it makes it quite clear that what they're doing is trying to sidestep the consumer protection legislation by making it look like they're not cold calling people when in fact they are.
So an Ontario judge would figure that out.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. My client.
You only record when it benefits you. That's it. We only record then.
That's right.
So let's go back to the idea of, this stuff is all clearly a scam. Okay. It's all evil doing. So let's think about the money side of this thing for a minute, because we agreed there's thousands and thousands of these going on. They're going on probably today. Probably somebody's signing up today to want some of this junk, right? And eventually, I'm guessing, based on my experience, it's probably about a 5 to 10 year timeline. Let's call it an average of 7 years. before something needs to happen. Either the house is sold, or because people are elderly, they get infirm, they have to eventually move out somewhere, or they just need a smaller premise, whatever the case may be, and they sell the house. At that point, you order your payout statement, you make the grisly discovery of what's happened. We've got the astronomical payout statement that's like 1,000%, 10 times what the value of the thing is. And by the way, they made payments for those 7 years. Somehow that didn't really help at all. You said you thought some of these were like 50-year loans, right? Before you ever got to a payout point, right?
Yeah, you're 20 or 30 usually, which is usually beyond the lifespan of the chattel in question.
No kidding. And beyond the lifespan of the person who signed, for God's sakes. Yeah. So we got these obviously ridiculous payout statements in front of you. The person who you're dealing with, your client, just says, I'm going to guess, but I'm guessing I'm right. Going to say, I had no idea what this would end up costing. All I understood was there'd be a payment. And I had no idea it was registered on my house. We've talked about that. None of them knew. None of the people I talked to know, and none of the people you've ever talked to know. And then finally, how the hell could it be this much money? This is crazy. So the crunch thing is, time crunch. You got a house sale to close, right? And they've delayed sending you the payout statements till about 7 or 8, 6, 5 business days prior to closing?
If we're lucky. Often they'll send them the day before or 2 days before.
Purposely, yeah.
Even though we request them, say, 2 weeks in advance. Yeah. So I can see the notice of security interest and how much it's registered for, which sometimes it's only registered for $2. Yeah. But the payout statement comes in at 20 grand or so. So you never know exactly how much they're saying is owing until they give you the payout statement.
Yeah. So then now we're in a jam. So the seller of the home, who's got a contract that says she's got to give up the home at a certain date, provide the keys, leave the house, vacant premise, and the only way out of this thing is you told me there's basically 2 legal methods that you could apply. Tell us about that.
So one, you can seek a court order discharge under the PPSA. And basically, you need to show the court evidence that this was fraudulent, et cetera, violated the Consumer Protection Act. And once you get there, if you can prove your case, which almost certainly you can, these scammers almost always lose when someone actually takes them to court. The court will order the notice of security interest to be discharged, but there's not a lot of time to do that.
Not enough time for sure.
Not before closing. Unless the other side is very understanding and grants an extension or something,
which frankly never happens.
That's a unicorn.
Oh.
So the other way, you can pay them, but under protest. Say, here's the money you're asking for, but I'm paying it under protest, which means I retain the right to sue you. I'm not acknowledging that this is a legitimate debt because I take the position that you violated Consumer Protection Act and the common law, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the money, discharge it. I'm going to sue you later.
So under the first situation, you might get an emergency court order, but you'd have to pay the money to the court, right? You'd have to come up with under the first scenario. You say, well, I'm not going to pay this. I'm going to fight it, but inevitably you don't have enough time. So you've got to pay money to the court, because then the court has the money. It allows the discharge to occur because it knows it's got the cash on hand. If you lose, then we're going to pay out the other party. Okay,
that's right.
Who the hell's got the $23,000 sitting around in their checking account if you're 70 years old? So maybe you do, probably you don't. So these are 2 situations where most people, I'm guessing, just say, I don't want to do this. Can we not just pay it out of the proceeds from the house? Is that typically what happens?
In my experience, that's usually what happens. People will say, I want to put this behind me, going to court is stressful. I don't want this dark cloud looming over my head. So just pay them the 10, 15, 20, 50 grand, whatever. And then they pay them. Sometimes you can write to them and say, can you please reduce this? And they'll reduce it a bit, but they're still making an outrageous amount of money off of fraud.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad whenever people, do decide to pay these scammers, because they're just enabling them. They're giving them money, which allows their frankly, it's virtually a criminal enterprise to continue ripping off mostly elderly and vulnerable people.
Because we've thought about it and we've realized that when this starts, like when you want to start this criminal enterprise, both the guy who's running the sales gang and the install gang, he can get paid pretty quick. Like the capital guy, the guy who's going to own the PPSA, who's going to own the loan, who's going to own the rights to hold you up at closing. That guy's going to pay the money to the first group of scammers in most cases. And so they're paid off. And that could take years. We figured it's about a 7-year kind of a run before they're getting payments, sure, but that's sort of just covering their interest. And then the payoff is, so you've got to have some real money, right? If you're going to do a lot of these, you got to have millions and millions of dollars to make this really work, or because you're not getting much money back for the first, until the real cycle starts in about 7 years, right?
Exactly.
So just how lucrative is this? Have you got an example of somebody who is clearly scamming and has made a shit ton of money out of this? Do you have that example?
I do. So I mentioned these Crown Crest companies,
right?
The multitude of them, and there's also related companies called Simply Group. So there's a whole bunch that have Simply in the title: Simply Group, Simply Green, things like that. Yeah. Same director, a fellow by the name of Lawrence Krimker.
Okay.
And his last name being Krimker probably explains why there's so many companies that he directs called Crown Crest Capital, etc.
Okay.
Really likes that particular
alliteration
consonant.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's alliterative. So you could use other words in alliteration with it too, which I won't mention on air, but
I do. I use all those words. Go ahead though.
Fair enough. So this fellow, just out of pure morbid curiosity, I looked into his background to find out, who are the supposed masterminds behind these scams and these companies that perpetrate these scams. So I found out that in the Toronto area alone, he owns 4 properties, 2 houses, 2 condos.
Jesus.
Most recently, and this is in Toronto, so you can imagine what these are worth. Most recently, he bought a mansion in March of 2023 for $12.2.
That's just this year.
Just this year, $12.2 million.
What the fuck? $12.2 million?
Yep, I got the title search right here with a $7.6 million mortgage to TD Bank. This guy had a down payment of roughly $5 million.
By the way, we're not mad at TD Bank. Obviously, this gentleman has. What it actually makes it worse because this person would have had to. I'm just making a quick thumbnail estimate here. I think he's got a proven income of like $3 million a year plus. Okay, for a while, and come up with a $5 million down payment. What the actual fuck? That is unbelievable wealth. I mean, let's face it. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous. And as far as I can tell, based on, what I've looked into, these companies are his brainchildren, and these companies are evidently making enough to pay him an outrageous amount of money. But
and
it's
as far
all
as you
based
can
on
tell,
scams.
he is the sole person. He may have investors, of course, okay, but he is the exclusive mastermind of this whole thing.
Yep, he's the sole director. He's facing charges because he's the director.
What charges? You got the charges here, right?
Yeah, I got charges. So currently he's facing 3 charges under the Consumer Protection Act for a failure to issue refunds, which means that basically when one of these contracts goes through, when you sign one of these contracts, there's a cooling off period of 10 days.
Sure.
You can say, actually, I don't want this contract. Please issue my refund. And
that's the law.
That is the law. You have the right to a refund in that case. And if they don't provide it, then they can be charged for a failure to refund. And I noticed a lot of these scammers face that exact charge.
Okay, all right.
Because you can imagine, well, it's going to cost them money to issue the refund. They've probably already paid the salespeople and the installation people, and it took them, gasoline to get the junk to the house.
But it's absolutely the law. This is inescapable.
It's inescapable. There are certain circumstances, like I mentioned, when people have the right to a refund during this cooling off period.
Yeah.
And yet they don't issue it, so they get charges. Those charges, in theory, under the Consumer Protection Act, each one of those charges could result in a fine of up to $50,000 and jail for 2 years less a day.
Jesus.
So the potential consequence of this is significant. I have never heard of one of these directors actually going to jail, though.
It's a settlement, right?
Yeah,
they settle with the crown.
They end up settling, exactly, yeah. and maybe I don't know exactly what the settlements look like because they're confidential. You can't access that info, but it's probably they end up paying $20,000-$25,000. Who knows? And then the company pays it. Again, they see that as a cost of doing business. They think, well, if I can make multiple millions through this scam, and
they bought a $12 million house, for God's sakes.
Exactly, and only have to pay the occasional, $20,000-$30,000 fine. Well, that seems like a great deal, doesn't it?
It's a fantastic deal, but for all the wrong reasons. Okay, so this is like extraordinary. I mean, this kind of like startling wealth is a clear sign that this is a fantastically lucrative business. You've shown me that it is absolutely against the law. It's against the Consumer Protection Act. They're acting in there's charges against some of these people under the Consumer Protection Act. We know that there is actual sales activity that is going on that's completely outlawed since 2018. So the real thing hits me, which is a common thread in white-collar crime in Canada. There's no policing and there's no enforcement. Is that a fair statement?
Not enough.
Not nearly enough.
Not nearly enough. I mean, they lay charges, but those charges are evidently not enough to dissuade them from actually doing it. The whole purpose of the Consumer Protection Act is to protect consumers by making it not lucrative to scam people, but that's not what's happening. I should correct one thing. Krimker is not currently facing those charges of failure to issue refunds. He was back in 2020 when I first started to sue his companies. Right now, he has different charges. So those ones have been resolved. Who knows how? Probably financial settlement. Yeah. You agree to pay a fine, and we'll drop the charges or whatnot. Currently, though, as of today, he's facing three different charges under Consumer Protection Act. Failed to take reasonable care as director. What that means is he hasn't taken reasonable care as a director to keep his companies that he's a director of from engaging in violations of the law.
So, to sum up, this is a prohibited business. It shouldn't happen. There should be no cold calling, no telephone soliciting, no door-to-door, no nothing. Since 2018, should be completely absent. But you're dealing with stuff from 2020, so clearly the stuff was happening.
Oh, yes.
And it's happening today. It's incredibly lucrative, to the tune of $5 million down payments on the fourth house, kind of lucrative, okay? And it's not being aggressively attacked by the provincial attorney general. Because some of this stuff is just pure fraud. Like if you're putting a chemistry you're getting somebody to pour tap water and you're scamming them with the idea that they're going to die if they keep drinking the water because the dye turned and it was going to be dye anyway, that every single glass of water that you would ever pour will change color. It's just crooked. So it's clear that this is going to keep on going until something happens. Or maybe it'll just keep on going forever. But at the end of the day, this is a hellacious scam being perpetrated on people who are vulnerable in Ontario.
Absolutely.
The elderly, the infirm, the unsophisticated. And it doesn't look like there's any end in sight because you're still seeing it in your practice weekly, right?
Oh, all the time.
All the time. So are we, by the way. Now, I'll just get on to my last point is just to touch on a reason why this is not infinitely litigated. Because we talked originally about why, a certain set of circumstances, your litigation training, come to a real estate practice, come from a province where it didn't exist, so you were startled. But if you were brought up in the real estate business as an articling student and as a new lawyer and trying to work your way through a real estate practice, in all likelihood, you wouldn't litigate these things, would you? Because the reality is that your business is either repeat business from people you've done a real estate transaction before, or it's on a referral basis from a realtor or a mortgage broker, okay, or maybe a bank rep. I don't know, but it's on a referral basis. So everyone who's referring a client to you, and when you encounter these things, you have the wherewithal to say we're gonna try to do something here. We're gonna fight. But for all those people who were brought up in it since they were baby lawyers in the real estate business, what they have learned is we don't want to rock the boat. We need to close. We need to close. So yes, we'll tell our clients what happened here. Yes, we'll tell our clients there's probably some wrongdoing. Yes, we'll appeal for reduction. But we're not going to go litigate these guys. We need to close the house deal here, okay? Or we're not going to get any more referrals from these people. Is that a reasonable way to describe what's going on?
Absolutely. I see that all the time. Most real estate lawyers, the vast majority of them, are not also litigators.
Nor do they even have litigators in their firm.
Exactly. Okay. A lot of them are sole practitioners.
Yeah.
Or they practice with other solicitors who only do paperwork. They don't see the inside of a courtroom.
Right.
So they're not motivated to pursue this any further, by suing them to either get their money back or to get court-ordered discharges of these notices of security interest. So, yeah, they just pay it out. And same with the realtors. They have no motive, no financial motive anyway, to see that the client doesn't get ripped off by these notices of security interest.
Let's make it clear. They also had no knowledge of it. Absolutely not.
That too. They don't have any training about that.
And but they didn't even. They don't do searches. They don't know that there's any of these things in place. So the motivation and in some ways the legally, I'm not going to say legally correct, but there is another legal motivation that you need to close, right? I mean, there's things that can go wrong if you don't close on time.
You
right?
can be sued in breach of contract if you don't.
Yeah.
And any financial cost that the other side suffered because you didn't close on time, they can sue you for that.
So let's sum up by saying this. When we did that little section of the pod, and Julian reached out to me, Julian was the only one who reached out to me. Like nobody else. Let's face it, this is happening every single day. I'm not saying I got 1,000 lawyers listening to my podcast, which would be ridiculous. That's not true. But lawyers know about this. And the reality is, Julian's the only person who called me because Julian, maybe thought, here's a kindred spirit. Here's somebody who's pissed off about this shit too, okay? Because I'm relentlessly pissed off because it's just so wrong. Like you've developed, the capital money people behind it have developed a scam that enriches them significantly, is clearly against the law. Like we've quoted the goddamn law here, okay? We've talked about the charges, and it just keeps on going, all right? So this is all wrong, needs to come to an end. I want to take this moment to sincerely thank Julian because he had I just knew it was going on. Julian has all the background, the details, the facts, the figures, the key truths of this thing. Like, holy crap, $5 million down payment on a $12 million house. There is money being made here, okay? And I'm not afraid to say it. Julian's not afraid to say it. I'm not afraid to say it. It's all wrong, okay? There is no goddamn $20,000 water heater, okay? There's not even a $12,000 water heater. There's not even an $8,000 water heater. There's like a tops a $1,400 water heater plus installation. That's it, okay? Maybe with the inflation today, maybe it's $1,600. Who knows? But it sure as shit isn't this astronomical amount of money that we're seeing. So, folks, I want to thank Julian Renaud, Renaud Law, and one good guy. That's what we got. I'm not mad at the realtors. Sometimes I'm mad at realtors for other things. I'm not mad at the real estate lawyers because the truth is they are pushing through deals on, they're not trained as litigators and they're pushing through deals in a pretty low cost environment, realistically. Okay. And they just got to close. They know they got to close. They know the most important, you're trained right from the get-go as a real estate lawyer that the most important thing is to close on time. I mean, that's a fair statement, isn't it? Okay. But still, my thanks to Julian being one guy, the David and Goliath story, because I don't think you're putting $5 million down on a $12 million house, right?
No.
It's a David and Goliath story of somebody who's willing to come out and say, this is bullshit. Okay. And it's got to stop. It should stop. Neither one of us think it's going to stop anytime soon, but we're sure as hell hoping that eventually there'll be enough people pissed off that a Crown is going to get interested, that there's going to be some real action taken. Thank you, Julian. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
My pleasure, Ron. Thank you for having me.
If you like the pod, well, don't just sit there. Go to YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and all the other ones and like the pod. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep being angry at mortgages and swearing about mortgages. Angry Mortgage could use your support.